Welcome to Helping Organisations Thrive. Today I have Gillian Harwood on the show. Welcome and morning to you, Gillian.
Morning, Gillian.
Good morning to see you. Good to see you. I'm just going to tell the audience a little bit about you. You are the co-founder of Busworks, although you've just recently sold that, but we'll talk a bit more about that later. Your career spans over 40 years, and you are, I would say, you're a visionary and a pioneer, and that's what we're talking a bit more about today, about being a visionary leader. Because back in the 1970s, you undertook a mammoth task of converting an abandoned Victorian bus factory, restoring it, transforming it with flair and imagination into a successful business hub for small businesses, one of the first of its kind. And it was almost this, you created this whole co-working space, which is quite a popular thing nowadays. And it was a bold and courageous move, and one that earned you Business Woman of the Year award, presented to you by the late Margaret Thatcher. You still have businesses. You still got Forum House in Chichester and the Needlemakers in Lewes as well, which you continue to work on and continue to grow. And we will be talking about and exploring visionary leadership and how that's worked out for you in your business, and understand a bit more about you. But before we get into that, I would really like to know what you love about what you do, Gillian.
Oh, well, my face always lights up when people ask me that question. I'm one of those lucky people that's always wanted to get up in the morning and get to work, because I think to a certain extent, my work has really given meaning to my whole life, because I actually love what I do. I love the creativity of it. I like the fact that it's transformational in very many ways, of people and of places and of buildings. And I love the variety of it. Every day comes up with different questions, sometimes problems, sometimes they're practical, sometimes they're philosophical, sometimes they're financial. And I'm constantly problem solving. Keeps me on my toes.
So you obviously like a challenge, don't you? You like to sort of, and it's interesting because challenges make us quite creative, don't they? Make us think differently about things.
I think they do, yes. I think business is challenging generally, and I think people, particularly people who run their own businesses where they're very much, in charge, it's another aspect of creativity. You really don't get anywhere in business, in my view, without having imagination and being able to, imagination, not necessarily creative imagination per se, but you can see the future, you can imagine the future. You've got to believe that there's a future in order to keep going, haven't you, in business?
Absolutely. And it's interesting. I look at your career, and it's, in some ways you can look at it and you can see, yes, Gillian Harwood is visionary leadership, and because you can see what you've accomplished and what you've done with your life and with your businesses. But I want us to take us back to those 40 odd years ago, when it all started, when you had from scratch that almost that bit of the nothingness. When things start, there is nothing, there is there. And I want us to get an understanding of, what did you see? What was it about when you took on that sort of Victorian bus factory? What was it? What got you the idea? What was the inspiration? Because you were doing something incredibly pioneering at that time.
Well, actually, the Busworks was my third building, and by far the biggest. I started off on my own in a little burnt-out factory in North London, which I'd sort of inherited. And I inherited it, but in the worst possible way, with all the problems of a building that's not been insured, been burnt out, been occupied by a company that hadn't paid its rent, hadn't done anything to, unaware that I was starting on my new life, because at the time I had two young children and I was at home running a sort of big house full of students. I had student lodgers. I cooked all their meals for them and made their beds and everything. And I had about 5 of them in my house. And one day there was a knock on the door, and it was a bailiff who handed me a brown paper envelope and said, I'm come to take your house away.
Oh,
and I
said,
what's all this about? And he said, well, you owe the bank some money. And I said, well, which bank? And he said, NatWest Bank, as it happened. And I said, well, that's not my bank. I think that's my partner's bank. And what had happened was that my partner had pledged my house against a business loan, where he had occupied this building in North London. And he had not filed any returns. He had done lots of bad things in business. And he had forged my signature on a document to give the bank the security of my house. So when I say I started with nothing, I started with minus, because I also inherited, in those days, this was the mid-70s, a debt of £12,000, which, you know, must be at least 10 times that amount now, with no way to go. And I just have no idea how I came to succeed, but I had this idea: what do I do with a burnt out little factory? What can I do with it? And then I suddenly came into my head that I could turn it into bed sitters, like my house, for businesses. And that's what I did. I started the whole concept of shared workspace. You hear it now, started with the concept of bed sitters for businesses.
Bed sitters for businesses. I like that. That's a really interesting one.
And that's really how I started. I haven't any idea, looking back, how within the 6-week period, the bank gave me 6 weeks to come up with the money. I was very successful in writing letters to bank chairmen in those days to tell them that their minions weren't doing what they should be doing, and that they should be listening to me rather than telling me, no, you can't borrow money. And particularly with NatWest, they didn't immediately foreclose, take my house away. They gave me 6 weeks to come up with a solution. And in 6 weeks, somehow I managed to sort out enough to find another bank that would lend me not just the £12,000, but another 30,000 in order to do up the building. It was lucky I had a house in the first instance, which I could mortgage. I remortgaged my house 5 times over the period of time of setting up my business. Each time I needed to go up another notch. Thank goodness the value of the house had gone up, and there was always a bit of spare equity which I could put down. Now, of course, banks are very reluctant to do that because they really don't like taking houses away from people.
No, they don't like doing the sort of personal side of things, do they? That's quite an important thing. So obviously you came up with this concept, this bed sitters for businesses, which I think is a great phrase. What was it that you saw that as an opportunity? Because it's easy for us to say now, oh, that's an obvious thing, Gillian, to do. But we're now 40 years on. Then there was nothing. I don't think I was alive. I was very small. There was nothing I'm aware of that was like that, was there?
Well, I didn't think there was at the time. It just seemed sensible to me. I mean, I had already run small businesses. I'd had an antique business. I had two stalls in 2 different antique markets, which gave me the idea of just, when you have a stall in an antique market, you just sign a bit of paper, one side of A4. I'll pay you so much a week, and I'll be here for 6 months or something. And then at the end of 6 months, if I don't like it, I can go. So I combined that very much into my idea that I would do the same thing. I don't know. I think there was a stirring in, the early 70s was the time of the real crisis, with the oil crisis and the secondary banking crisis and the 3-day week and all those terrible things that people like you read about now, but I actually lived through them. And somehow, a bit like, after the asteroid struck, this is another of the things I always say, I was a small furry mammal. They say the asteroid came and it knocked out all the dinosaurs, but that gave the chance for the small furry mammal. And it seemed to me that the small furry mammals were small businesses, which were just beginning to stir, and people were beginning to say, hey, I don't want to work for a big organization 9 to 5 anymore. I've got an idea. And so I don't know how I knew about that, but it just seemed logical that there would be those small furry mammals around. And so it transpired.
So obviously you had this, I'd say probably more now, this sort of sense of a vision of what it could do. Did you in your head see something quite big, or was it just it's where you were at the moment at that time? Did you see anything bigger?
Absolutely not. I absolutely thought, my God, if I can get this little building, which was about, I think, probably only 5,000 square feet or something, if I can get this off the ground, and I at that time, my partner was an accountant, so he could actually do a cash flow forecast, which I'd never heard of. And I thought, my goodness, if this all works out and I can rent the space at sort of £4.50 a square foot or whatever, in about 10 years' time, I might actually sort of be able to take some money out of this business, but at least I'll have rescued everything. And of course, it took me totally by surprise that the first building was as successful as it was. And it was almost before I'd finished the first one that I saw the second building. I saw some chaps climbing up a ladder, putting a to let sign on yet another lovely old Victorian wreck just off the Charing Cross Road in London. And I thought, oh, that looks like a lovely building. Maybe I could do the same thing there. And so I went, I can't bore you with all the times I went to the bank to try and raise money and how many different banks I went to and how patronizing they were. In the 70s, of course, it was really tough if you're a woman to do anything. I mean, when I had my house and wanted to buy a fridge and a washing machine, and I wanted to buy them on hire purchase from Arding and Hobbs, the famous Arding and Hobbs at Clapham Junction, they said, oh, right. Well, we better get your husband in then, hadn't we, to sign all the documentation.
That's terrible.
And I said, well, I haven't got a husband. Oh, well, we better speak to the general manager then. So we went up to the management floor at Arding and Hobbs, and he had the forms out on it. And I said, could I have a look at the forms? And he didn't say anything about husbands at all. The word was householder.
Thank goodness things have changed, eh?
I'm a householder. So, he said, oh, well, never done this before, but all right, then you can sign. So there you are. I was a pioneer in getting hire purchase from Arding and Hobbs as well.
Yeah, and it sounds like obviously your business started probably out of necessity, wasn't it? You had this, bailiff at the door, and you had to do something. You had a potential opportunity. You got an idea. You got some insight, which obviously which is great. And it was started out of necessity, and probably didn't. And I guess, and I know a lot of people in the last 18 months, because of COVID impact, are also starting businesses initially perhaps out of necessity. They see an opportunity, but actually they're being forced to. And actually sometimes being pushed to do something can be an impetus and propel you forward, can't it? It can actually be at the time, obviously it wasn't great, but actually if you look back, that challenge, that adversity has got you where you are today in some ways, isn't it?
Absolutely. I can't believe that I would have ever done very much more than I did have a gardening business as well. Business is in my bones a bit.
It sounds like it.
But I come from a background of sort of small retailers. So, women have always worked in my family. So I was certainly not pioneering from my own point of view in that respect. I don't know. I think that being forced into business I don't know how you can just sit around and conjure up a business idea. You have to learn from something else. Something leads from something else. And it's a bit like, if you're a painter or a writer, you still pick up ideas from somewhere else. You can't. It's very difficult to actually think that you can invent a business in a vacuum. You certainly can't. No. You can learn a lot from mistakes that other businesses have made. I mean, when people are young, I say, look, the very best thing you can do is go and work for somebody else first. Learn by their mistakes, learn how businesses work, learn about profit and loss, learn about the real fundamentals, what is an invoice, the importance of the first telephone call, the importance of, in those days when you were writing letters, that you had really well designed letterheading, even though you were working from a scruffy house in Wandsworth. Pretend that you're not. There are certain things that are important, but I don't know how you would start from absolute clear scratch. I take my hat off to all these young people. I actually wonder what they're doing on their computers when they're sitting in coffee shops. What is their business? I was in a co-working space yesterday with a client. That's where they are, and I was doing a day with them, and I was wandering around as you go get food and go outside and stuff. And there's lots of people there, all on the laptops doing stuff and having calls with people. And
And I'm just nosy. I always like, well, what do you do? I'm just curious to see what they're up to, and what sort of business are they do, and it's quite a nice hub of activity, and a nice atmosphere to it. You can see why they're becoming quite a popular thing, over the years, because it's a good way of taking you from your bedroom, so to speak, into a space where you can sort of be with other people and feels proper, doesn't it? Like a business, then, doesn't it?
Yes. Well, I think, working on your own, I mean, another thing that I love about my business is the team. I like being part of a small team, leading a small team. I get terribly bored if I had to just work totally alone. It wouldn't work for me at all. I find that, that is quite difficult to understand, how people do feel quite happy to work on their own completely.
So over the years, over the years, you've obviously, your business sort of was launched or came out of almost necessity, but with a sense of insight, and you got on and you start to acquire other buildings. How did you? I suppose there still would have been challenges. They just perhaps got bigger in some sense along the way, and then you had people with you. You had a team of people, because obviously sometimes doing things on your own or just yourself impacting is some sense easier, because you just got yourself to think about, and you just got to get yourself up and going, motivated, how to get around this. But how did you navigate some of those challenges, and just perhaps bring up one or two of those with your team? Because it's harder, isn't it, when they're not totally perhaps aware of perhaps your vision or aware of what you've been through, to take people with you sometimes, isn't it? So I was wondering how you've done that over the years.
Well, I think people, my business sort of hit buffers as it grew. And then the major thing that I can't do are accounts. I've never learned how to do accountancy. So we muddled along for a long time. And I did realize that I needed professional help. And that was, and in fact, now I've sold my business, and I've still got my other business, but all my lovely team went with the business that I've sold. The only thing that was really panicking me was help. Where do I find a financial controller to help me run my new business? And luckily, one of my my operations director, she secretly rang somebody who had worked for us 8 years ago, but who'd left to join the church. And as it happened, he had been praying, because he was realizing that he wasn't making enough money, for some means of making more money so he could educate his children. And my call came for him as a sort of a guardian angel coming to help his problem. And he has come back to help me with mine. All the other things in business I can manage. So it's only when I've realized that with more than one building, obviously you can't physically be in the same place. So you've got to then hire somebody to be in the other one to look after it. And I've always been very lucky with staff. They've sort of come to me. I haven't advertised for them. Very often I've helped them out of, actually looking back on it, almost entirely help people out of a problem. Somebody, maybe one of the people in the building, has said, I've got a wonderful client, and she's just been widowed, and she's just the sort of person that you might get on with. That sort of thing, rather than actually putting an ad in and trying to find somebody. So we've grown the team, and we've all known each other, and people have worked for me for more than 20 years. So it's more a family than a team.
Yeah, and I think there's something in that, isn't there? And perhaps you're an individual who just gets on with it, and it's great to see, and you're incredibly successful. But obviously you're doing something that's nurturing people, and the fact that people stay with you for a long time, which is incredible in terms of loyalty. They're sticking around for something more than just the money, because life and jobs is more than just the money. It's the people you're with, the bosses you work for. So is there any thoughts of how you've nurtured? Have you sort of intentionally done that, or that's just sort of happened, or have you learned things that made you think differently about things?
I think it's my style. I think if I trust people, then it takes a lot to get me to trust people. But when I do, then I pretty well trust them implicitly. And if I can see that they're competent, then I give them autonomy. And I think that when I talk to people, and I talk to them all the time. God, you've been here for 20 odd years. Why? Well, it's because when I wake up in the morning, I just can't wait to get into work. They say, and they say, it's my business. They feel it's their business rather than anybody else's business, because they know that they are really important and they know where they fit in, and that I'm not going to, if there is ever an issue, it's usually my fault. I'm more than happy to admit that I have failings. If people don't understand something, then it's because I probably haven't explained it to them properly. But on the whole, I mean, it's like in personal relationships. I don't like arguments. So I like to be able to talk about things openly, frankly, and sort of somehow bring people along with me. I asked my children, I'd say, was I a terrible mother? Because I used to shout at them and I was tired and ratty. And they said, no, we don't remember any of the shouting. But what we do remember, Mummy, was that we never wanted to disappoint you.
Wow, interesting.
And I don't know whether I mean, in a way that sounds rather ghastly, but I think that's what my staff feel as well. They want to give it their best.
It's interesting. You said, I think I don't want to gloss over this. You said something. You said that when you make a mistake, you admit you're wrong. You also said if somebody didn't understand something, you say, oh, perhaps I didn't communicate it properly. And so that's an interesting point on leadership, because that's you being self-aware, but also being open and transparent, being completely humble, and also putting the onus on you. Because often I think leaders will go, well, I communicated to you, and they don't recognize, actually, perhaps I didn't communicate it in a way that was effective. But actually you're having that approach, which is probably why you're nurturing such teams that people feel like a family around you.
Yeah, I think it probably is. I do treat it a little bit like a family, but also, everybody has got a common goal. Funnily enough, although what we do has an element of sort of regeneration in terms of doing buildings in very down at heel areas, trying to bring jobs and employment into bad areas, and we also try very much and help school leavers. We usually try and take very junior people in at the very beginning, say working on reception, which is a very responsible job. I mean, it's almost the most responsible job in a business, the receptionist. But with help, it gives them terrific self-confidence very quickly, and then they can sort of develop and grow much more on the management side. So I think, I do feel that it's that companies should be more responsible. I think that finally the world is catching up with the way that I've always managed people. I think we're not profit driven, except that I can't bear things not to make a profit. There's no point in working in a business if it can't wash its face, at least.
No.
So people know that, but they know also that it's not just about the bottom line. Really it isn't. And I think there are lots of things that are going on in the world at the moment which are completely alien to the way that things should be done. This not taking of responsibility from the very top being the most important. That's missing terrifically, I feel, at the moment where we are in this country.
No, and it's interesting that your view and on leadership and is done by how you've acted in the last 40 odd years in terms of how you built your business. And it's a testament to how you're operating. So I think there's some important lessons. And just thinking of some lessons, if there's somebody out there who might be working in an organization right now and has like a pipe dream of starting a business or a little inkling of an idea, so what advice would you give them in terms of how they go about that? What sort of one or two things they need to think about?
Well, it's awfully difficult because, this is where I think, gosh, if I was just sitting twiddling my thumbs, had been 30 years ago, where would I have started? But I think you really do need to learn from your own experience and build on things that you've seen, either that are a success or things that are a great failure that you think, well, I could do better than that. Or I think you don't need to worry too much about the sort of things that business manuals always tell you about, which is doing market research and doing all of this. To a certain extent, you do have to depend on intuition. You can go mad thinking whether you're going to have customers or not. You've got to believe in your own product or your own ideas. And then to a certain extent, it's the old mousetrap thing. If you build a better mousetrap, people will come to you. That if you've got a better idea, then but if you're enthusiastic and love your business, other people will too, because you'll be able to talk about it with such integrity. You really, and again, there will be people who poo-poo me, but integrity and honesty are so important to build up trust with suppliers, not just your customers as well. You do have to build up a very good supplier base, because then you can rely on them when things go disastrously wrong. You can call on them and they'll drop everything to come and help you or supply you or whatever it is. It's teamwork all along. I think you can't do things on your own.
No, and it's because you mentioned that belief, and that's a real big thing, isn't it? I think if you've got to believe in your idea, you've got to believe in what you're trying to achieve. Because if you don't believe it, nobody else will believe it.
Get anywhere.
And you get, and that enthusiasm of belief actually is quite contagious. And I think, I'm not talking being fake, not talking about forcing it, but you got to believe it, and then that's when you engage. Whether you engage with clients, investors, those around you, they feel that belief, and I think they'll be with you on that. And that's really important, isn't it? Belief.
Very well. It's essential. I mean, how can you work in something you don't believe in? A lot of people work in big firms, I understand, where they're really not that. They probably don't believe in what the company does. They may believe in their department and they're faithful to their little area of the business, but they may well not be that happy about the whole thing. But yes, if you're running your own business or starting a business, absolutely essential. It's fundamental. Yeah.
So now you've sold this business. I know you still have other businesses. But what does the future hold for you, Gillian?
Well, I'm hoping that it's got quite a few years, although you can probably see that I'm not a spring chicken. So what is good is that at my age, I do actually still think about the future, and I am still excited. So I think it's certainly true that because my big business, Busworks, took up a lot of the time, and particularly over the last few years trying to get it through COVID, we've sort of let one or two of the other places sort of rest on their laurels. And I think that I'm now going to be able to focus on businesses that I've sort of just rather left to their own devices, and try and bring some new ideas. I'd like to consciously work on a building in Chichester to make it needs retrofitting, to make it absolutely, as sort of to see how feasible it is to buy all these new materials that everybody bangs on about, but that normally are either out of stock or very expensive, all the eco materials, and not get swept away by the builder saying, look, we'll never get this job finished unless we use X, Y, and Z. And you think, oh gosh, yes, we've got to go back to using sort of, the plastics and this and that because they're available. So I'm quite excited about that whole concept now of doing some eco refitting. And then, of course, it's my projects up in Great Yarmouth that I will be also being able to get back to after COVID, because I haven't been able to travel up there very much, and see whether there are, I've got the projects, but what I need now are to inspire people to come and work in them. I'm doing up lovely old buildings, rescuing them, which is what I love doing. But I also don't want them to just sit empty, making business space. And I'm hoping to find aspiring young people, even in a left behind town like Great Yarmouth, which is notoriously renowned for lack of endeavour and get up and go. And, that's what I'm going to be trying to do. I'm getting into trouble up there a bit with the local authority, because I think some of the things they're doing are a bit old-fashioned and not ambitious and enough. So,
but it's great to hear that you're still got that pioneering spirit about you. You've still got lots of energy. You're not stopping. You're doing great stuff in Great Yarmouth, doing revitalizing it and honing it for helping businesses and therefore communities and create wealth in the area. It's fantastic. It's been really great to speak to you today, Gillian. I really have appreciated it. I value your experience, value what you've done. I think you've done a great role. You're a great role model in business and how you go about it, not just in the business sense, but also in the sense how you deal with people, which I think is really important, and it's really valuable lessons there. If people want to get in touch with you, connect with you, find out more about what you're doing, particularly in Great Yarmouth, how can they do that?
Well, they can go on to LinkedIn and see me on LinkedIn. They can contact me. My company is Lewes Workspace Limited, which is, you can just Google it. And I'm available to anybody who might be interested. And particularly, if young people want to get back to me and say, well, I've got this idea. What do you think? I'm open to having conversations with people. So just get in touch with Lewes Workspace Limited and ask for Gillian, and you'll find me. And it's Lewes, Lewes in South.
Excellent. I will put those in the show notes as well, so that'll be if people can get in touch with you. Thank you for your time, Gillian, and appreciate that.
Thank you, Gillian. Nice to see you.